This young guy is still dealing with the loss of his mom. Deep down, he blames just one person, his dad. All those years of holding in his anger have morphed into straight-up resentment. And now, when his dad unexpectedly shows up with a much younger woman he plans to marry, everything in Glenn snaps. What began as quiet sorrow turns into a fierce urge for revenge. He's set on making everyone pay, kicking off a series of events that will rip the family apart and bring to light painful secrets that have been hidden for ages. The film kicks off in a city where a young man named Glenn starts his day with his regular jog. It's a routine he never skips. After his run, he heads back to his big house where he lives with his grandmother. We quickly find out that Glenn's life has been tough, especially since his mom took her own life a few years back. Since then, Glenn has held his dad responsible for what happened. Over time, that hurt has turned into a deep-seated hatred for his father. That morning, his grandmother gently informs him that his dad, Mauro, is coming home soon. The news instantly brings Glenn down, as he can't stand the thought of facing the man he blames for his mother's death. But his grandmother reminds him that she hopes to see peace in the family before she gets too old. She even nudges Glenn to find a nice girl and settle down soon. Later that night, when Glenn comes back from campus, he hears some odd noises coming from one of the rooms. Curious, he cracks the door open and freezes when he sees a young woman, just out of the bath, applying oil to her skin. She's stunning, and for a moment, Glenn is just captivated. But then, the door creaks, startling her, and she screams. Glenn tries to explain himself, but she keeps yelling for help until Mauro rushes in. Eventually, Glenn learns that the girl's name is Lisa. To his surprise, Mauro introduces her as his girlfriend while telling Lisa that Glenn is his son. Eventually, Lisa gets the picture and apologizes, clearly feeling embarrassed. She appears nice and friendly, but Glenn can't stand her and storms out in anger. That evening, during dinner, his grandmother comes into the kitchen just as Mauro drops the bombshell that he plans to marry Lisa soon. The news hits Glenn hard since he thinks Lisa is way younger than his dad. Disgusted, he decides to leave the table. The next morning, his grandmother mentions that after the wedding, she intends to visit her hometown for a bit. Even though Glenn tries to persuade her to stay, she insists, saying that Lisa is a fantastic cook and will take good care of him. A few days later, Mauro and Lisa tie the knot, and after a small ceremony, they head home to spend their first night as a married couple. The next morning, Glenn's late mother's photo catches Lisa's eye as he picks it up. But when Glenn walks in and sees her holding one of the pictures, he's filled with rage and rushes over to snatch it from her, warning her to keep away from anything related to his mother. Lisa tries to calm him down, assuring him she means no harm. However, for Glenn, the pain runs too deep, and he tells her she can never replace his mother, suggesting it's best for her to keep her distance. Instead of getting upset, Lisa stays composed and tells him that even though he dislikes Mauro, she still wants to be friends since they're not that far apart in age. Glenn doesn't reply and simply walks away. Later that evening, as Lisa serves dinner, Mauro tells her he knows Glenn isn't happy about their marriage and advises her to be patient with him. However, Lisa reassures him, saying she'll take great care of Glenn and will soon win his friendship. Just then, her phone rings, and after picking it up, she tells Mauro that her younger sister is coming to visit. By the next morning, Lisa's sister Sue arrives, and it's clear she's also very beautiful. When Glenn first sees her, he's obviously captivated as Mauro introduces them, but Sue tries to be friendly, while Glenn immediately becomes cold and distant. Noticing his attitude, Lisa gets annoyed and attempts to scold him, but Mauro steps in, reminding Glenn that Sue is a guest and deserves respect. Glenn's mood only darkens, and feeling more frustrated, he leaves to meet his girlfriend, Julia. As they share a close moment, Julia senses his anger, and when she asks about it, Glenn eventually vents about everything: his father's new marriage, Lisa moving in, and now her sister too. In the end, after hearing him out, Julia suggests a plan for him to follow. Back at home, Glenn decides to tackle the situation differently. He walks into the kitchen, all sweaty, and grabs a glass of water right in front of Sue. Even though he notices her staring, he plays it cool as he finishes his drink. He then leaves the kitchen pretending to be on a romantic call with Julia. When he sees that Sue is still watching him from the kitchen, he playfully teases her by recording her with his phone. Meanwhile, Lisa observes their little interaction through the windows but chooses to remain silent. A little while later, Glenn returns to the kitchen for another drink, and this time, Lisa is there. As he starts chatting with her in a teasing, flirty manner, Lisa tries to brush it off, but when he provocatively asks if Mauro makes her happy, her patience finally snaps. So, she slaps him right across the face just as Mauro walks in, and he instantly realizes that something must have gone down as he scolds Glenn again. But this time, Glenn isn't going to stay quiet. He responds rudely, which only makes Mauro angrier. However, Lisa quickly jumps in to try and prevent the situation from escalating any further. In the end, the argument leaves Mauro really stressed, and due to his heart condition, his health starts to decline that night. The next morning, Glenn calls his grandmother to explain that Mauro's condition worsened overnight, and that Lisa had to rush him to the hospital. Now alone at home with Sue, Glenn invites her to grab some snacks, completely unaware that this is all part of his plan. While they hang out, Glenn strikes up a friendly conversation, and as they laugh and chat, Sue eventually leans in closer and whispers that if he ever wants to have some fun, she can make him happy. This opens the door to his first plan as he joins her in the bath that night and they share a special moment. The next morning, Sue seems unusually happy, convinced that Glenn now has feelings for her. So they have breakfast together, smiling and chatting as if nothing had happened. Moments later, Lisa comes home with Mauro, who has just been discharged from the hospital. He's now in a wheelchair, looking frail and barely able to move. As soon as they walk in, Sue rushes to pour him a glass of water, but Glenn doesn't even look his way. This infuriates Lisa, and she snaps at Glenn, blaming him for his father's condition. In the days that followed, Lisa has to take on the responsibility of caring for Mauro since he can hardly move on his own. She has to feed him, bathe him, and even help him drink water. One evening, while Lisa's busy with chores in the kitchen, Glenn quietly approaches her and praises her for how patiently she's been caring for Mauro. His tone felt sincere, and for the first time, Lisa noticed her anger towards him starting to fade as she realized that Glenn might not really be arrogant, and perhaps he was just deeply affected by his mother's passing. So when Glenn invited her to sit down and relax for a bit, offering to give her a massage, she didn't think much of it, until Glenn went beyond what she anticipated and took control, something Lisa willingly succumbed to. When she finally made her way back to her room, she found Mauro asleep. As she settled next to him, he opened his eyes and gazed at her. That night, she desired him, but Mauro couldn't perform and left her feeling let down. Meanwhile, it becomes clear that Julia's plan for Glenn was to entice the sisters into developing feelings for him. This way, he could shatter their hearts and his father's as well. Earlier that day, Julia had a chat with him in her car since he hadn't dropped by in a while. But as he stepped out, Sue spotted him from afar and, curious about who he was with, approached Julia to ask about her connection to Glenn. Julia, who was in on the scheme, simply smiled and told Sue that Glenn was just her classmate. Later that afternoon, while Lisa was outside tidying up, a woman mistook her for a maid, which instantly angered her, prompting her to storm back into the house. Just then, she heard Mauro calling for her from inside, and she hurried in to find him collapsed on the floor. Concerned for him, she lifted him up and attempted to tidy his bed, even though she had just cleaned it. However, it was clear that she was worn out and overwhelmed by all the responsibilities she had to shoulder. But with no other choice, she pushed through the work, and that's when Glenn approached her to offer assistance. Although Lisa initially turned down his help, the emotional tension between them soon took over, leading to another intimate moment shared between the two. But unbeknownst to them, Sue was keeping an eye on them from the windows. Eventually, Lisa admitted to Glenn that she was fed up with handling everything on her own for Mauro. Seizing his chance, Glenn suggests she leave his father and marry him instead. This completely catches Lisa off guard, and she storms away after venting her anger at him. Once inside the house, Sue confronts her right away, slapping her and accusing her of betraying her husband. However, Lisa, already on edge, fires back. The argument escalates quickly, forcing Glenn to intervene and separate them. Still feeling heartbroken, Sue insists that Glenn make a choice between them. When he picks Lisa, Sue's heart breaks all over again as she rushes out of the house without a word. Hours went by, and Lisa couldn't locate her anywhere. She called over and over, but Sue didn't pick up, and soon Lisa began to feel guilty for arguing with her sister. As she turns to Glenn and tells him that whatever they had is finished, Glenn refuses to let go, insisting that he doesn't care what others think and that he only wants her. Yet, despite his words, Lisa feels torn, knowing that if Morrow ever found out, she could never forgive herself. But Glenn is undeterred as he continues to charm her, and just when they get close again, Mara walks in. The sight hits him hard, causing him to collapse once more. This sends Lisa into a panic as she pleads with Glenn to call for help. But he stands firm, believing this is justice, feeling that he has finally avenged his mother. By the next day, Glenn's grandmother returned home, and upon hearing what transpired, she was furious. That's when she finally comes clean to Glenn, revealing that Morrow never betrayed his mother. In fact, it was she who betrayed him, and she took her own life because her lover left her. This harsh reality hits Glenn hard as he comes to terms with his errors, leading him to break down in tears. The next morning, Glenn seeks out Lisa just as she's about to leave the house. She carries the weight of shame for her actions, and even though Glenn pleads with her, repeatedly apologizing, Lisa simply tells him that he has a future ahead of him and should focus on taking care of his father. Just before she walks away, she mentions that he can marry her sister if that's what he wants. By the end of the film, we see a transformed Glenn, fully committed to looking after his father, who is gradually starting to heal. He even asks his father for forgiveness, and with tears in his eyes, Morrow forgives him. Thus, the movie concludes with the family finally achieving peace and closing the long chapter of suffering and regret. And that's a recap of the film Mama's Boy. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and leave us a comment. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.